On January 10, 49 BC, Gaius Julius Caesar, with the 13th Legion under his command, crossed the Rubicon River. Centuries later, the historian Suetonius would write that he said in Latin, Alea iacta est, the die is cast. The arrow had been released, and there was no turning back. In 50 BC, the Roman Senate sent an order to Caesar, then governor of southern Gaul. He was to disband his legions and return to Rome as a civilian before reaching the Rubicon. According to the Republic's imperium law, any commander had to dismiss his army before crossing the northern border of Italy. But Caesar knew this was a political trap. His rival, Pompeius Magnus, Pompey, was preparing to accuse him of insubordination and treason. Entering Rome without his powers would make it far easier to arrest, try, and possibly execute him. Thus, Caesar decided to march on Rome at the head of his army. This single act would plunge the Republic into years of bloody civil war. One by one, Rome's military figures began taking on political power. Caesar waged campaigns from Spain to Egypt, especially against Pompey, achieving remarkable victories. Finally, in early 44 BC, confident that he had defeated all his enemies, he returned to Rome and declared himself Dictator Perpetuus, dictator for life. But from that moment on, Rome became more dangerous for Caesar than ever before. The historian Titus Livy, described 3 events that paved the road to his death. The first took place during a ceremony at the temple of Venus Genetrix, where senators were publicly humiliated. That day, new titles were to be granted to Caesar in recognition of his achievements. However, when the senators arrived to honor him, Caesar refused to rise and reportedly said he had enough titles already. His failure to show proper respect gave the impression that he no longer cared about the Senate or its authority. The second incident occurred in January 44 BC. The people's tribunus Gaius Appius Marullus and Lucius Flavius were walking through the forum when they noticed a crown of laurel leaves placed on the head of one of Caesar's statues. Since the crown symbolized royalty and Jupiter himself, they ordered it removed immediately. The situation did not escalate then, but a few days later tensions rose again. On January 26th, as Caesar was traveling along the Appian Way, a small group greeted him with chants of Rex, the king. Marullus and Flavius ordered their arrest, but Caesar retaliated by removing both tribunes from office. This bold move caused him to lose significant support in the Senate. The third event occurred on February 15th, during the Lupercalia festival. In front of a large crowd, Mark Antony, one of Caesar's most trusted commanders, placed a laurel crown on Caesar's head and shouted, "The Roman people offer you this." Cheers and applause filled the air. Many hailed him as king, while others watched in silent concern. Caesar gently put the crown aside and said calmly, "Only Jupiter is the king of the Romans." Still, this scene deeply disturbed those already plotting against him. On the evening of February 22nd, Senators Gaius Cassius Longinus and Marcus Junius Brutus met in secret. Determined to prevent Caesar from becoming king, they decided to assassinate him. Brutus insisted the act should not be carried out by a single man, but by 60 to 80 senators, Rome's most respected figures, so it would be seen not as murder, but as the just execution of a tyrant. The date was set, March 15, 44 BC, the Ides of March. This would be Caesar's final Senate meeting before his planned Eastern campaign. Because the Senate House was under renovation, the session would take place at the Theatre of Pompey. That morning, Caesar hesitated to go. His wife Calpurnia had a terrible dream foretelling his death and begged him to stay home. Even the soothsayer Spurina had warned that he was in danger until the Ides of March. Caesar considered postponing the meeting due to ill health, but his friend and confidant Decimus Brutus, who was secretly part of the conspiracy, convinced him otherwise. As Caesar arrived, he was cheerful. He even joked with Spurina. "Well, the Ides of March have come." Spurina replied quietly, "Yes, but they have not yet passed." Once inside, the conspirators surrounded Caesar under the pretense of paying respect. Lucius Tillius Cimber approached to plead for his exiled brother's pardon. When Caesar refused, Tillius grabbed his toga, the signal to strike. One of the Casca brothers stabbed him from behind, and Caesar cried out, "Casca, what are you doing, you traitor?" Immediately, the rest joined in. Surrounded, Caesar tried to defend himself but was overwhelmed by the flurry of daggers. He was stabbed 23 times. Some accounts say that when he saw Brutus, he uttered the famous words, "Et tu, Brute?" "You too, Brutus." Then he fell, bleeding to death at the base of Pompey's statue, his old rival. The assassins left the dying Caesar where he fell and ran through the streets shouting, "People of Rome, we are free again." But the citizens were horrified. After the funeral, an enraged mob marched toward the homes of Brutus and Cassius. and even killed a poet named Helvius Cinna, mistaking him for another conspirator. The Senate later deified Caesar. Statues were built in his honor, and inscriptions declared him father of the fatherland. But his death did not bring peace. Instead, it ignited the Second Roman Civil War, ending only with the rise of Augustus. All the conspirators, including Brutus and Cassius, were dead or had taken their own lives within 3 years. On February 14th, Caesar had been declared dictator for life. Only a month later, on March 15th, he fell to 23 stab wounds in the Theatre of Pompey, dying beneath the feet of his greatest enemy's statue. The Republicans may have felt relief for a moment, but that relief would never be enough to save the Republic itself.